Hello, gang, and welcome to another episode of Tabletop Topics with Kyle. My name is Kyle. And if you couldn't tell from the vaguely Eastern European accent, we're going to be talking about the new book that Wizards of the Coast just dropped, Ravenloft, Horrors Within. And being someone who is already running a horror-themed campaign, I had to get my hands on it because I can use all of the inspiration and ideas and resources that I can actually get. So we're going to be talking about that book, and most importantly, is it worth your money? The answer is it kind of depends. So let's get into it, and I'll tell you exactly where it lands. All right, so first look at the book. I got the standard cover for this one. I typically opt for alt covers when the art is better, but I actually like the art better on the original cover on this book, so that's what I ended up picking up. Now, I will caveat all of this by saying I am comparing this to the 5th edition book, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. So there's a good bit of overlap. This book does some things better. The Van Richten's Guide does some things a little bit better. So we'll go into some of the ins and outs there, which one I prefer, and which one is worth picking up if you only have room on the shelf for one. Let's focus on the new book, right? So the art in this book is amazing, and it doesn't even start on the first page. It starts on the front jacket. So this is really cool, very much like wallpaper. Got some little bats. And it seems like they went with a little bit of a theme here on the art. But there's a ton of really cool stuff in here. There's some really awesome art. I could probably just turn to a page and find some awesome art. Yeah. That is just so evocative, sets a mood. And I love that. So the vast majority of this book is about different domains of dread. And domains of dread are their own little planes of existence where a Dark Lord has power over the entirety of that pocket plane. So for the OG, as I like to call him, Count Strahd von Zarovich, he rules over Barovia. He's in charge of pretty much everything that goes on there. He has the most power by a wide margin in that plane of existence. So there are 16 domains of dread that they do basically a deep dive into that you can plug and play into your campaign as you see fit. And that's going to have different Dark Lords. For example, Innsmouth, which the Dark Lord is Cthulhu. I love that. I'm going to be stealing small parts of that for sure, since my home game has a little bit of Eldritch Horror feel. So there are 16 of those. They've also got adventure hooks in there for each of those domains of dread. And then there are 20 some odd additional domains of dread that they more or less briefly touch on. So there's a lot of really cool world building inspiration in this book that I love. The other thing that I think that they do really, really well is the creating domains of dread section. So they break down different genres of horror. So they have cosmic horror, if you like that. They've got folk horror, which I'm very partial to. I'm going to be using a good bit of that in my campaign moving forward. So I'm going to be taking little bits of inspiration from that. They've got slasher horror. They've got gothic horror. And they break down different types of monsters, which you can find in this book as well as adventure hooks, where the adventure's set, and you can roll on the table. So that's a huge value add for any DMs out there. And that's what this book does really well. Now, Van Richten's guide also dives into that. The new Ravenloft book does a little bit more. So if the world building side is something that you kind of fall short on, and you need to pull a little bit more from some source material, this is a great book for that. The one that I think does atmosphere and actually running a horror game better is Van Richten's guide. So if I had to pick just one of them, I would go with Van Richten's guide for that purpose alone. And these are both really small sections. It's 2 pages or somewhere around 2 pages in The Horrors Within, and then in Van Richten's guide it's about 4 pages on running horror games. But in my opinion, the whole horror aspect is through running the game. So that comes from pacing, that comes from being very intentional about language, that comes from different ways of making things build that tension and that eeriness, that spooky vibe. And that's where, it stops becoming a lighthearted, playful thing, and it starts becoming, oh, this is actually kind of scary. And I think Van Richten's gives you a little better guidance. So if we were looking just for a overall horror book, that's the main reason I prefer Van Richten's. They do a little bit better of a job presenting that. The other cool thing that I like in this book are the 2 new subclasses. And I say 2 because they do include reworks of things that are in other books. For example, in Van Richten's guide, they introduced the College of Spirits Bard and the Grave Domain Cleric. Those are in this book as well as additional other subclasses. So if you're not a book collector like myself, there's probably a lot of value there. But the 2 brand new ones that I really, really like are the Hollow Warden Ranger, and the one that I am most excited about, just from a flavor perspective, is the Animator Artificer. So my big thing with Artificers has always been, it's got to be steampunk. It's that type of flavor all the time. It's creating a little steel defender, or making little trinkets and guns and bombs and things like that. But the concept of the Artificer is really, how can I take something apart and make something new out of it? And what they did in this book is, instead of playing with machinery, they play with corpses, which is a cool concept to me. Hey, I'm going to take these old body parts that don't really have a purpose anymore, and I'm going to give them a purpose. So it's a unique take on the Artificer, and kind of infusing it with a bit of necromancy. So from flavor alone, I love it. Now, the other thing that I did end up picking up, because I didn't have one yet, was a Tarokka deck. And again, I'm a sucker for really cool art. There's a ton of really, really small details in here that I absolutely love. Is this something critical to any campaign? No. The Tarokka deck is set up to run like you can do with any standard pack of playing cards. So it's 52 playing card deck plus the jokers, and you can do Tarokka. I personally love props. I love having something physical to play with and to put down on the table. It usually will get a pretty excited reaction at my table. So whenever I get to give out a little card that's a custom homebrew item, or pull something out like this, I love that opportunity. And I really like that they included a couple alternative art cards. So these guys specifically are super ominous, and I'm probably going to have to practice some sleight of hand to make sure that those land where and when I want them to. Now, the final thing that I really, really love that they added into this book that I hadn't considered was it's a quality of life thing for me as a DM, and it is the dark gift feats. So they introduced dark gifts in Van Richten's guide, and what they did to change it a little bit was a very small thing that a lot of folks might not put a lot of weight on initially. However, if you've played D&D, or if you've played Magic the Gathering, or things like that, you know that the wording of certain things makes a big difference. And in this case, for the dark gift feats, they added a prerequisite. So what that is basically saying you can use these however you want in a Ravenloft game. So my main thing with that, and why it's a really cool quality of life update for me, and I would imagine several other DMs as well, is they introduced setting specific things, in base 5th edition, and they didn't put necessarily a prerequisite on it. For example, Silvery Barbs, really, really cool spell. However, it was introduced in the Strixhaven book, and it's meant for that setting. So I've seen it used time and time again outside of that setting. So that's more of a rules as written versus rules as intended type of thing. I think as intended, it's meant for Strixhaven, and people are using it rules as written, which, if that's what is fun at your table, that's fantastic. I personally, if I could abuse the heck out of that spell, I would, as much as my DM would let me. But on the other side of the screen, I would prefer them to not use Silvery Barbs, because it is a pain in the butt to deal with. So I would say, okay, well, yes, you can have this dark gift if we're in this type of setting, because if you look at it, in the rules it says there's a prerequisite. So it kind of takes the onus off of me in saying, no, you can't have that new shiny toy that you want, because, well, I didn't make these rules. But again, that's up to DM discretion, as always. So that's a thing that I personally like. So at the end of the day, is this worth the money? And to that I say it does depend. If you're a avid book collector like myself, and you have all of these previous editions, you've got the majority of the subclasses in it, you've already got Van Richten's guide, I don't think it really is worth the money. But that being said, if you don't have a lot of the earlier source books that have all of these different subclasses, and you don't have Van Richten's guide, 100% this is worth your money. If you want any type of horror flavor, there's a lot of really, really cool stuff you can do. So if you're running a horror game, or if you're thinking about running a horror game, what setting are you using? What's working at the table? What's not working at the table? Let me know in the comments. I love hearing about that type of stuff. And if you are a huge horror fan, then I do a lot of horror themed stuff. My homebrew game that I'm going to have an ongoing series covering with DM resources, player resources, all of that type stuff, cursed items, things like that. You can always follow me here, check out my blog at my Substack, as well as my website, which is all linked in the description box below. But again, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all of the algorithm things that help me out. That is very much appreciated. But in the meantime, may the Baba Yaga not take you this night. See you later, gang.